don't own the land. We are part of the land, and we aren't here to prosper from the land. We are here to work in harmony with the land. I think the classic for me was around Hobart when they first established a colony in Tasmania. They found this lush valley where the Aboriginal people were, and the European Tasmanians then thought it would be good sport to hunt the Aboriginal people down, and they took the women for sexual use, and they were sent off on whaling ships as ships' wives. What an awful concept that is. And they hunted and killed the remaining Aboriginals in that town, and then they moved in cattle and sheep. And within 4 or 5 years, the whole valley had gone sour because there was no one maintaining it. There was no one burning it. There was no one. And so the whole thing became a desert because they had destroyed the stewards of that country.
So did something similar happen at Kurnell, where there were the great dunes and forests?
Well, this is the clash. We hear about our famous forebear. I'm trying to think of his name. Thomas Holt, and I got into a lot of trouble over this because Thomas Holt is held up as some sort of icon for the area, and I said he was nothing but an absolute scoundrel. And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, when he was given the Holt 100, he was given 100 square miles of Sutherland Shire, which included that point at Kurnell. Kurnell was covered in a forest of redwood. A forest of redwood. Go out there today. Well, first up, they had hunting expeditions shooting those koalas. You know how dangerous koalas are. So they had hunting expeditions, and they would shoot them and hang them on the fence because you can't eat them. The meat's not good for eating. So they had 39 in one day, they were claiming. So that's Holt's first experience. Then he cut down all of the redwood and sold that off. And then he was left with grassy plains. So he brought in sheep and cattle who quickly denuded the grassy plains and left us with sand hills. And his forebears have now dug those sand hills out, and now we've got large pits of salty water. So you're asking me if Kurnell has been damaged? It has been slashed, burned, raped, pillaged, and absolutely destroyed. But he's our founding father for Sutherland Shire.
So
I can't believe it.
So is the family still holding on to land there?
Yeah, well, Breens, and they're all related, yeah. They're all connected. Yes, it's just appalling when you ask about Sutherland Shire. Oh, my God.
Aboriginal people were here tens of thousands of years and managed this continent.
It improved. It didn't decline.
Right. They fire stick farm. They they did all of this work to change the land and to make it work for themselves.
But they didn't change the land in a derogatory way.
No.
Right.
No.
Now, what they did was that they would go to an area and they would camp in that area and they would clean that area up. So they would get rid of the underbrush. They would get rid of the rubbish, and then when they finished camping, they burn that area off. And when you burn it off, you get green grass. So when you come back next year, you come back to a grassy area where animals come to feed. So you're creating your own larder. You defecate out of the light of the campfire, and the seeds from the food you're eating replant themselves. And so every year your campsite doesn't get less productive, it gets more productive. But you're not digging the land, you're not cutting the trees down, you're just maintaining it. And so I think that Aboriginal stewardship has got a lot of things to tell us. On the other side of the bay, on the sea side of the bay, on Solander Point, of course, Breens have mined that area extensively. Now, when I was a young man, there were absolutely dozens and dozens of campsites there, and they've all been mined. I did go out there with a camera in about 1997, 98, and videoed some of it, but when I started to make fuss, they quickly blocked it off, and of course anyone's prohibited going there now. What I saw out there was there were layer upon layer upon layer of campsites over many, many generations. I know that Breens have uncovered some skeletal remains out there, and once the initial flurry over those faded away, of course, they've never discovered another one since. So, you wonder what's going on there. So generally, around Cape Solander there are some sites still. Around some of the bays, Maroubra, there are still some, but generally not. Further into the bay, there were a lot of sites, campsites, and in fact, I think it was Gidley King first met Aboriginal people in Botany Bay, and he went up into an area of Cogra Bay, which is an offshoot of Botany Bay, and they, after meeting initial resistance, then found another group of people and had what's recorded as the first picnic there. And there's a place called Picnic Point, which I think might be related to that occurrence. But the sad thing is there's a bay off Botany Bay called Limekiln Bay, and it's a great source of interest for people because they say, oh, yes, this is where they used to dig the lime for the mortar. And I say to them, well, do you understand what the lime was? It was the campsites where all the shells had been placed, and so...
So they're hauling away middens.
They're hauling away middens, and that stopped in about 1860, I think, but by that stage they had taken thousands of tonnes of shells, and so they had destroyed all of that. So it's a very sad thing. If you read Philip and King and a couple of other early governors, they say that by 1810, 1820 at the latest, there were no surviving Botany Bay people. And now, when you say that out at the mission at La Perouse, people get very upset and they say, oh no, Biddy Giles was here and, all these various, Queen Emma Timbury was here. But when you actually look into it, those people came up from the south coast, and so the bay probably was denuded of the 100 odd people that were living there, or maybe the 150 people are living there, and then a new wave from the south coast came up. Why do I say that? Well, because my family came up. My great ancestor, William Rollan, a convict, have I told you about him? William Rollan was wrongly convicted, Tim.
Of course.
Of course, absolutely. Wrongly convicted as a thief, sent out to Australia and given 15 years. So he was going to be hung. But they gave him 15 years not to ever return to England, and he was sent down here. This is why I live down here now. This is my home country. And he married an Aboriginal woman named Susan Ellis, who was the daughter of the local Kadaicha, the witch doctor, who was proclaimed king of the Illawarra. So one side I'm a convict, the other side I'm related to a king. Anyway, they married, well, yes, they did marry actually, and they had a number of children, and those children... One of them was named after Dad, William Rollan, and he moved up the coast and set up a camp at a place called Salt Pan Creek, which is off the Georges River at the back of Botany Bay. And then in 1901, or 1895 to 1901, in that period of time, he came down the river and established the La Perouse community. So I know that Emma Timbury and... Biddy Giles, William Rollan, or Old Rolly, or William Rolly, all the various names, they all came up. Now, how do I know that? Well, only my family history. Yeah. I know that Emma Timbury actually camped in Dead Man's Creek, and so we know that she had a camp house there, and she came up from the south coast. But the thing that pointed it out to me was that I was doing all my research and looking at the sites, and then hearing the dreaming stories that these people are telling me, and they were mismatching. So they were telling me a story about whales and how the whales did this and the whales did that and how these things. But when you look into them, those are 5 island dreamings, and 5 islands is Wollongong, Illawarra dreamings. And I pointed out to them that the whales that are being depicted around Botany Bay are orca, killer whales. And the whales they're talking about are right whales and humpback whales. And so...
And you know that because of the engravings of Botany Bay?
Yeah, of course. I actually have this funny idea that you actually should see the evidence. Now, when I was a little boy, you went to La Perouse and they had boomerang throwing as a demonstration.
On a loop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Timberries, Laddie's dad was a great boomerang thrower.
No, that was Joe.
Was it Joe? Yes, it was Joe. Yeah, and they had snake pits and they had a whole range of things. But these are imported ideas. Along the coastline, they just had throwing sticks. And the interesting thing is that I was wondering, how can I find some evidence for this? And someone just, in the last few weeks, has given me the absolute best clue. When you read Banks's account of the Guigal, he said that they had scimitars, swords. And when you actually look at these boomerangs, they are like scimitars. And he said that they used them as fighting sticks and clubs. And so I think that's pretty obvious.
Didn't they take away some and they wound up in the British
Yeah,
Museum?
they took 65
So we
away.
know what they look like.
Yeah, we know what they look like. I've got photos of them actually. If you go and look at my record, I've discovered hundreds of sites. I'm aware of where they all are. I take people out to look at them. I visit them regularly because it's my job, I see it, to maintain that cultural connection and to keep those stories alive. It's not my job to collect information to give to the national parks or to the Australian Heritage Commission. That's someone else's job, if it's a job.
Yeah.
My job is to make sure that these stories are kept alive, and that's how I keep my country alive. So I'm frustrated by anthropologists and archaeologists who want to collect sites, who want to collect the notations, who want to rush around. There's a person down here in the south who's been doing this for years, and when I was doing my masters, I went and saw that person and asked them if I could have some of the photographs that they had taken, and they said, oh no, this was their business and that they couldn't give them to me. And I said, do you understand that this is my culture? Yeah. These are my engravings, my paintings, my drawings. And this person got very upset and we had a parting of the ways at that point.
So what remains then are the middens, I guess? And
well, even the middens. If you go around all the bay, if you read Flinders' accounts, the best account he gives in is Port Hacking, the next bay down. He said that when he went in there, the bay sparkled with many diamonds, and I wondered what he meant. And then as I read, I realised he's talking about the piles of shells. And so in 1801, there were mounds of shells all around the bay. I've counted over 85 campsites, right? Now, by 1850, 10,000 tonnes of those shells had been mined out of the bay. They actually even built a lime kiln in one of the small inlets in Port Hacking. So you should ask me, how do you know 10,000 tonnes, Les? Well, because the ships would come in and they'd have ballasts of stones, and they would dump those stones at a particular place called the ballast heap now. And we've actually done a quantitative survey of that, and we find there's 10,500 tonnes of stone there, so that we've got to say, well, an equal amount of shells would have replaced those stones. So we can say that in the 30 or 40 years that they mined them, they took 10,500 tonnes out. Now, once it became unprofitable, there wasn't enough shell there to sail a ship down, the locals started digging them and burning them themselves and would sell the lime. And so that's what's happened to all those middens.
so it just seems to be one extractive industry after another.
Of course, yes.
Hauling away for lime, you've got hauling away the mud oysters, you've got hauling away the sand dunes.
Yes. They've stripped the bays, both bays.
So how can people imagine they can continue to live this way?
But they do, Tim. They just keep
there's no
increasing.
more.
I see on TV yesterday that the Queensland government has given permission for another couple of 100,000 acres, and they've got 2 bulldozers with chains stretched between them, just stripping the country of trees. It's endless. We can just keep going forever, Tim. We can just keep destroying the country. No, it's just a joke. It really is. I'm appalled by it. And when I think that my people lived in Botany Bay for 30,000 years and had a comfortable, relaxed lifestyle, it's crazy.
So isn't it Cook or someone who says how at peace and how wealthy the people
Well,
were?
he does it in a backhanded way.
Yeah.
He said that these people don't have any of the things that we have, but they live this idyllic life of leisure. And he wonders in his diaries and his logbooks, maybe that's not a bad way to do things. Yeah. But then he went back and told them there was no ownership of land and there were no crops. And so, there's another thing. We talk about terra nullius. I'm going to be raising that. What does terra nullius mean? Well, everyone just takes it as a crude Latin terra, earth, nullius, no one. But it doesn't mean that at all. Terra nullius is a financial term, and it says no one owns property in Australia. It's there for everyone to take. And that's what's gone on. It's very, very cruel.
Because I've been interested in the link between North America, where Britain could no longer hold and send its prisoners because of the American Revolution, and then what happens to Australia.
1770. When was your revolution? 1770. 1776. That's right. Yeah.
And so they started moving the prisoners off of the hulks out in the Thames and here.
Yeah, that's right.
And then that destroys the nation.
Here's something that amuses me greatly. There's a great antipathy to Aboriginal people in Australia. I can't be Aboriginal, Tim, because I'm clever, I have qualifications, I'm well educated, I'm actually got some money in the bank, I own a nice house, and I haven't got an alcohol problem. So I can't probably be Aboriginal because I've just given you the antithesis of Aboriginal people. But the funny thing is that when the colony arrived here, when the settlers arrived here, there was something like 800 men to a couple of hundred women, and those women were shared out amongst the officers. They weren't shared out amongst the scum, the convicts. And so where did the convicts get their wives from? The local Aboriginal women. And we know that went on. We know that if your family's been in Australia for more than 5 or 6 generations, you can't avoid being connected to an Aboriginal family somewhere along the line because there was simply no white women. The funny thing down here is all the Aboriginal families have Scottish and Irish names. Why? Well, because there was a hierarchy amongst the inmates, the criminals. If you're a good English criminal, well, that's okay. But if you're an Irish criminal, well, that's terrible. And if you're a Scottish criminal, well, you're the bottom of the heap. So those guys married all the Aboriginal people. And so down here we have all the McLeods and the Stewarts, and they're all because that's where they were married from. That's where they came from. It's very interesting.